Good morning. Welcome to this week's Wednesday meditation. Our gospel this past Sunday gave us the familiar Beatitudes as they are found in Luke. Of course, in Matthew, they are part of the Sermon on the Mount, and in Luke, they are often called, they are part of the Sermon on the Plain. Luke says that during the early days of Jesus' ministry, he would go up to the mountain to pray, spending the night in prayer with God, and then in the morning he would come down to teach and to heal. And so this morning he comes down to a level place with his apostles. There we find a great crowd. A crowd of those who follow him, and then also a multitude of people who have traveled from far places to hear him preach. He looks out upon them, and what does he see? He sees people who have come to hear him. He sees people who have come to be healed of their diseases. He sees individuals who are deeply troubled, coming to be set free. People clamor to get close enough to touch him. He also sees the religious leaders, Pharisees and scribes, watching him and looking for a chance to stifle his growing ministry. I was recently told by a friend of a large gathering back when Catherine Jefferts Shorey was the presiding bishop of the Episcopal Church. And this gathering was outside on a hot, sunny day. The dignitaries were in the shade behind her under a large tarp that was stretched out above the risers where they sat. And the large gathering of people were standing out in the sun on this particularly sweltering day. The story goes that she saw the sweat beading up on their brows and their eyes squinting on that bright, hot day. And she saw some having to leave because they couldn't take the heat. And so she paused the worship service and asked everyone to move over to a nearby shaded area large enough to accommodate them all. My friend who was there told me that the people having to endure the heat and the sun gratefully began to move. And in contrast, however, some of the ecclesiastical dignitaries in their long cassocks and lacy surplices had looks of disbelief that they must lose their shaded seats and have to go stand with the crowd. As we've heard before, the last will be first and the first will be last. Well, anyway, Jesus is looking out on this large crowd of haves and have-nots. We might easily assume from Jesus' teaching that he is differentiating the rich from the poor, the healthy from the sick, those who mourn from those who laugh. And I certainly think that the Beatitudes spoke clearly to economic and social conditions. There is also a way of hearing this teaching that speaks not just to the people's material comforts or needs, their physical or mental health or illness, their easy laughter at all that is well, or their weeping over all that has gone wrong, their smugness over being in the in crowd, or their shame in being excluded. So another way of hearing and applying this teaching is this: blessed are those, happy are those, whose hearts and souls are open to God, receptive to God's mercy, and malleable enough, flexible enough, exposed enough to be bruised by the injustices they witness. This past Sunday at Church of the Advocate, we had a gathering of about 20 for our worship service. And before the service, I handed out a piece of foil to each person, much like this. And before the service began, I asked each person to hold this because they might need to use it later. When the sermon began, I showed them an apple. This apple, I said, as Valentine's Day is upon us, stands for your heart, your soul, your place deep within where God's love resides. As life happens to us, we unwittingly strive to protect this sacred, tender place within us. I ask them to consider what they have needed to protect in their lives, in their inmost self, in their souls, in their tender hearts, from the experiences that life brought upon them. And then they were invited to come forward and wrap the apple with their piece of aluminum foil to symbolize what form their self-protection had taken. One person came up and said, I was abused as a child and have turned people away, fearing they would hurt me. I will help you, but I won't let you help me. Another person came up and said, materialism has been my armor. I've thought that if I have enough resources, nothing can get to me. Another person said, I keep thinking that if I can just find one person to always love and protect me and provide for me, I'll be safe. And another person said, I used substances and became addicted to them because they temporarily took away my pain. And others came forward until the apple was thickly wrapped with foil. And so the Beatitudes through this lens begin to sound something like this. You are happy, free, when your heart, your soul can be moved and can be turned toward God and neighbor. Rather than doing whatever it takes not to feel what you need to feel and not to do what you need to do, there is a false dichotomy in the opposites we create in this life. We think we are either rich or poor. We think we either hunger or are filled. We think we either mourn or laugh. We think we are either in or out. But when our hearts are open and vulnerable to God and to neighbor, we are made poor by others' poverty and wealthy when riches are shared. We find a longing in ourselves when others hunger and a deep contentment when others have enough. Our hearts are drawn to accompany others in their grief and to rejoice in their joy. And we find no comfort in being separated from those who are different from us. We have a sigh of relief when we discover what we have in common. Blessed and happy are we when we can turn to God and to others in our need. Blessed and happy are we when we can turn to God and to others in their need. Blessed and happy is a heart that can be broken, a heart that can be moved, a heart that can swell, a heart that can be filled. Jesus didn't want some of us up in the stands and some of us out in the heat. He wanted us all to turn toward God and open ourselves and be vulnerable enough to one another to gradually become one in Christ and one in the God who created us and loves us so very much. God bless you.